Hello and welcome to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wilson. If you are a new listener, welcome. On this podcast, I explore the unique needs, educational journeys, and learning experiences of students who think and learn differently. Today, we are talking about gap years, and we have a very special guest joining us, Julia Rogers. Julia is the founder of EnRoute Consulting and a leading international expert on gap years. Over the past 15 years, she has guided countless students and their families in planning impactful gap year experiences, and she's here with us today.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Julia, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here and talk about my favorite thing.
I know. I'm excited to learn about gap years and particularly how they can be beneficial to students who learn and think differently, which is kind of what we do on this podcast. We talk about how to support students with learning differences or mental health challenges. And I have to say that this is a topic I know very little about. And when I do have students and parents who are considering a gap year after an assessment, I will often recommend they speak to experts, people like you. So I am thrilled that you are here today. So thank you.
Yes, I'm very excited to reach all your listeners who this may be beneficial to.
Yes. And I know that there are misconceptions about what a gap year is. I know I probably have them as well. Let's start by you talking about kind of what people think it is and then explain what it really is and what it typically involves. And we'll start from there.
It is. It's important to start at the very beginning, as Julie Andrews says, right? So, I think that a lot of people attach their own definition of a gap year to people in their lives who may have taken that time or a cultural perception that they may have picked up. And one of the interesting things is that geographically, there's very different perceptions of what a gap year is. You go to Boston and it's seen as something that's, very beneficial. And I think that because it's a highly educated intellectual community, people think of a gap year as like this bridge between high school and college. Whereas you may go someplace where it's not culturally recognized yet. And they may think it's a year off, or it's just a year for kids who aren't ready for college, or it's elitist and it's only for, Malia Obama and people like that. So, I think that it really derives from where people are kind of coming from with their own experience as so many things. But we do have a working definition of a gap year, and it's a very simple, easy to understand concept. It's an intentional period of personal growth supported by experiential learning opportunities. So you'll notice in that definition that there is the biggest word, the most important word is intentional. It is not an accident. It does not happen because you didn't make an active choice. It is something that's, an individual says, I'm going to take this period, I'm going to learn and grow and prepare myself for the next stage in life. So, in this context, we're typically talking about it as for young adults, either as a bridge between high school and higher education or the workforce, or it could be between higher education and grad school or the workforce, or during college if there's some, missteps along the way with a college experience. But we could also be talking about it as a mid-career gap year or a post-career gap year. So it really is appropriate for many stages of life. But of course, we're going to be talking about it mostly in the context of young adults.
Absolutely. And what are some of the primary reasons that students choose to take a gap year? I'm sure that, the reasons there are a number of them, but are there those that stick out more than others?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because I've been doing this work for about 15 years, and the primary motivations have shifted and changed, with the generations and the moment in time that young people are kind of entering their adult lives. So in the past couple of years, we've been dealing a lot with students who are still affected by the pandemic. So they are kind of using a gap year as a reclamation year of developing more social skills, having experiences that they weren't able to have or that were stunted during the pandemic, which is a really interesting kind of, we're still feeling the effects of that time period for everybody, right?
Yes.
And, but then another thing that I'm really seeing is that young people just feel a lot of pressure to quote unquote know what they want to do with their lives. I don't know why we've put that pressure on young adults to feel like they should know, or that it's a cultural expectation that they should know, but they feel a lot of pressure. And I think that that's also kind of in confluence with the rising cost of higher education, and people really want to make a good decision about where they go to school and what they major in. So students are really also taking a gap year to give themselves a longer runway to explore potential career paths or vocations, and then make a more intentional choice about the type of education that they get after high school.
Right. And it seems that there are benefits socially and personally, like you've described, but maybe even benefits academically as well.
Exactly. It's interesting because I think that students who are different types of learners benefit from gap time in different ways. So for a student who is a high achiever, they are often pushing themselves to the brink during high school. They have high standards for themselves, high expectations for themselves, and they often kind of cruise to the finish line feeling really burnt out. And so a gap year for those students really helps them rediscover their capacity for learning as a place of joy, and they kind of just take that time as recharge time. Whereas students, and I would include, ADHDers in this, and other types of learners who need motivation, that a gap year, coming out of a school system where you're told what to learn, told when to show up, told to do X, Y, Z, for students who learn differently or learn in their own way, a gap year is really a gift to them to say, what are you curious about? What do you want to explore? How do you want to engage with the world around you? And students who learn, experientially in that way, come away from that saying, oh, like the world is actually really open to me now. And now I know how to use an education to get to where I want to go. So for these different types of learners, that you can really meet them where they're at, and then give them the types of experiences that are really helping them blossom.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking about what you talked about with the pandemic, and using it as a year to catch up socially, and getting that year can be a gift, particularly when students are behind in terms of aspects of development. When you think about, I often think about executive functioning and the planning, organization, time management, all of those things that will increase in terms of load when they transition to college or to the workforce. This can really be a gift for them to further develop those skills.
Yeah. And the style of parenting, with this generation that's kind of coming into adulthood has been, very attentive. And so giving students a space to fail upward sometimes, to reap the consequences in an environment where the consequences aren't failing out of college, but maybe they might be, losing a job or getting scolded by your internship mentor. And they learn by doing on a gap year in a way that feels a little bit more contained, and the stakes are a little bit lower, so they can practice those organizational skills and learn without, a parent breathing down their neck.
Right. Right. And I know we're going to talk about kind of what to look for in a gap year programs, but when we think about aspects of a gap year and what that can entail, are there aspects that cater specifically to students that learn and think differently that are particularly helpful in meeting their needs?
Sure. So, I guess I would suggest a framework that works for all students. And then I can kind of go in specifically into kind of students that learn differently or have mental health challenges. But, when I'm working with my students, we talk about growth in 3 areas: personal, practical, and professional. And so if a student can sit down and brainstorm things that they want to do in each of those 3 areas, they're going to have a really strong foundation in which to look for opportunities. So the personal category is going to be things that they just want to do for their own self, things that they want to experience, things they want to make time for. So maybe they want to practice a foreign language, or maybe they want to make more time for an artistic pursuit, or maybe they want to learn how to scuba dive or something kind of wild. The practical stuff is going to be those life skills, like you mentioned, developing social skills. I've had students say that they want to learn how to interact with people of all ages because they've been in this microcosm of high school. Getting their driver's license, practicing executive functioning skills, all of those things. So they decide how they want to learn and push themselves in that category. And then the career exploration or pre-professional stuff is going to be, opportunities that they can explore, those areas where they could see themselves in down the line as far as a vocation. So that's, kind of the framework that they can use as a brainstorm. But then I also think that for students who learn differently or have had different challenges, thinking about the situations that are going to best support them, is obviously an important starting point. So there's a huge variety of different gap year experiences out there. And some are more structured and supported than others. So when you're thinking about a student who might need more support at the beginning of their gap year, they might grow into more independent activities or things that are further away from home or even international as their gap year moves along.
Right. And it sounds like, again, those three areas are key factors in determining the type of program and what they will be doing during that gap year, whether it's personal, practical, or professional, in terms of where they want to grow.
Mm-hmm. And most students do multiple things over the course of their year. So when you think about the time frame we're talking about, if you're taking a full academic gap year, it's like 13 or 14 months long. So it gives you a lot of time to, if you want to get your first paid work experience, like you have time for that. If you want to do a program, there's time for that. If you want to travel, there's time for that. So a lot of students will segment their year almost in semester form, in the same way that you would if you were, going straight to college, and they kind of delineate it that way, which is a kind of, again, like a way to make it a big period of time feel a little bit more manageable.
Right. And, it seems like there are endless possibilities in terms of what that gap year experience can look like. How logistically, let's start with what does that look like? Are students applying to college because they eventually want to go there? Are they still deciding? Are they, saying, if I get accepted, then I will defer my admission? I'd love for you to talk about what that process looks like for students,
Sure.
especially when you talk about a gap year being intentional.
Yes, definitely. And I think that, what's really interesting, I just saw a colleague of mine post a blog post about how a lot of students are ready to get admitted to college, but not necessarily ready to start successfully. So when you're thinking about like your own young adult, that's an important factor too, is that just because they can get into college doesn't mean they should start right away. And colleges realize this too. And so many, many, many colleges allow for a gap year deferral. And some will we allow, gap years for any reason. So it could be personal growth, could be medical, could be military service, anything like that. Others have specific types of deferrals that they will request. So ideally, if a young adult is knows that they want to be college bound and knows and can make an educated decision about which college is going to be a good fit for them, I always recommend applying and then deferring, because it creates a 5-year plan. And it helps mentally, I think, with like knowing, where you're going to end up after your gap year. It makes parents feel more at ease, and it just kind of streamlines the process. I have noticed since the pandemic, and because college admissions has gotten so nutty, that a lot of students are waiting until their gap year to apply so they can make an informed decision based on what they've discovered about themselves on their gap year. And that's totally fine too. You just have to make sure that you take those logistical steps during your gap time to get the applications out the door and get the support you need from your old high school or from your, IEC if you're working with one, that kind of thing. I guess I should add that the deferral process is typically the university, if they allow deferrals, you typically put down a deposit at your school of choice, and then you'll write a gap year deferral letter saying, this is why I am committing to your school, and this is what I hope to do with my gap year, and this is why I think it's going to make me an even better student when I arrive the following year. So that's usually what colleges want to see when they allow a deferral.
Okay. And that, again, really speaks to the intentionality of it, where I intend to go to college, and maybe this particular college, but I know that I need a year, again, for either professional development, personal development, or practical development before I actually make that transition.
Exactly. And colleges typically love this because it shows, telling an institution you know what you don't know is pretty mature. And so a lot of colleges will have, they allow, X number of students to defer, or they allow as many students as give them good proposals to defer. So there are a few exceptions that the University of California school system does not allow deferrals. I think it's more bureaucratic than anything else. And a few other kind of like larger state schools or technical institutions don't allow them. But by and large, there's hundreds of colleges and universities across the country that are gap year friendly.
Right. And then there are students, like you mentioned, who aren't sure if college is the right choice for them, and they want to use that gap year to figure it out. And it seems like that is a really great choice and a good intentional choice, because it takes the pressure off at the end of the year. When you don't know, and all of these applications are due, and people are writing personal statements and all of that. If you don't know, and your heart is not into, making that transition at that particular moment in time, again, knowing that you're making the decision to have a gap year to grow can be really compelling as well.
Oh, for sure. And especially for students who learn differently, they might not be on a track to a 4-year school. And I think that as a society, we really need to work harder to normalize all pathways and normalize, the fact that people have these different gifts and that they are going to be, best applied in different settings. And I've had so many students kind of go both ways on their gap year. Some students, have done a very experiential gap year and discovered that, I am now motivated to go to a 4-year school and get a degree. I had a student actually a couple of years ago who thought he wanted to be an auto mechanic and did a 3-month or 4-month internship at an auto body shop. And then he did another internship where it was a little bit more of an IT white collar kind of position. And he came away from that gap year being like, actually, you know what? I think I want to go to college. And he's successful right now at University of Vermont. I have another student who kind of had the opposite path where they used their gap year to do construction work and do really hands-on building work and kind of discovered, actually, you know what? I want to go into the building trades. And that family saved probably hundreds of thousands of dollars because that kid would have gone straight to school. He was from a, double, college educated family. And so I think that, the idea here is to guide our young people into lives where they feel fulfilled and, like that they're, have a sense of purpose. And I think that there's many ways to accomplish that and make a good living.
Absolutely. And are there programs specifically designated as gap year programs, right? Is it something the student has to kind of figure out and develop on their own? Or are there specific gap year programs that you can actually look into, apply to? What does that look like?
Yes. So, I think that one of the easiest ways for someone coming into the gap year world to understand the range of options is to kind of think about 2 broad categories and then within them, a couple smaller categories. So, when you're thinking about a gap year, there's structured opportunities and self-designed opportunities. So if you, approach your parent and you're like, I want to take a gap year and I'm going to buy a van and take a road trip across the country. That's an unstructured opportunity or a self-designed opportunity. The kid has to make that happen. They have to buy the van. They have to create their own itinerary. There's no program. On the other side of it, someone might say, I really want to, explore my interest in education. So I want to go teach English in Guatemala for a year and really embed myself in a community and get that, experience. So it's a cultural experience and language learning experience and vocational exploration all in one. And there are volunteer programs that can support a student in that. So they match them with the school. They provide logistical support. They pick you up from the airport, take you to the clinic if you get ill. So that's a volunteer program. And then, there's also internship programs, courses, AmeriCorps and national service opportunities, and then another category, which we would call kind of gap year programs. And gap year programs are a little bit more structured in the sense that they typically have mentors and leaders on staff that help with the logistical and emotional support of the students. And then thematically, they really range. Some students want to go and learn how to rock climb and backcountry ski, and there's programs that are more outdoor exploration focused. There's students that want to do service or language learning. There's ones for that. There's studio art courses, theater, multi-focus kind of buffet programs where you just get to do a lot of different things and explore a lot of different areas of interest. So within the gap year program world, there's a lot of diversity as to how you can focus your interests.
It seems like that could be overwhelming in and of itself.
That's why we start with the framework, right?
Right, yeah, absolutely. And so are there particular programs that are specifically designed for students who learn and think differently or neurodivergent students? Or do you kind of lean into their interests? It's probably a combination of both.
It is. And that's, I think, another really wonderful, place in this moment that we are, is that there's a lot of recognition of the needs of different types of students. And so there are some really cool programs that are specifically designed to support students who learn differently. For example, there's a program in Washington, D.C. called Broad Futures. And that is an internship and career development program specifically for students who are neurodiverse on the spectrum and have learning differences. There's a program called SOAR, which is more of an outdoor exploration program, but they also do some vocational exploration in that. There's a program called Ingenuity Year, and they have one semester offering that where you spend time in Maine and you learn about climate change and data collection and different types of community development work. And they also go to the Dominican Republic and do more of a service-based semester. But with all 3 of those examples, the student can plug in based on their interests, but then the staff there are particularly educated and informed about how to support these students in their, ways of doing that are just, their own unique flowers, and also helping them develop those, executive functioning skills and the kind of challenges that are specific to those kinds of students.
Right. And, when students are making that decision, I know you're using that framework to help them decide, there's going to be some thoughts about the parents have about the gap year, and then thoughts the student themselves has about the gap year. How do parents play a role in the gap year planning process and decision making? What are your thoughts on that, and how much should they be involved?
Oh gosh, such a good question. I think, one of the ways that I work with families is that when I'm first getting started with a family, I give parents kind of space to say, what are your parameters? Mm-hmm. What is the budget that we're looking at? What are your hard stops as far as geography or type of experience that you would not support, and what are your hopes for your young adult? And I think that that can be replicated in, around a dinner table where you all sit down and a parent just communicates like, these are my expectations for the year, and these are what we can support and what we can't support. And then depending on the needs of the student, if a student has the ability to kind of take on more of that planning role or has the motivation to move towards some research and things like that, I always say, like, as much as possible, if parents can step back and let their kid make the decisions based on their parameters, then you're really encouraging that self-advocacy and empowering a student to take control over their year. If a student has more significant challenges and really needs that additional logistical support and, just mentorship through the process, then, parents can step in a little bit more. But also that's, I think, why there's a lot of third-party consultants like myself that both specialize in more therapeutic opportunities or, learning differences opportunities or traditional gap year experiences that can really be that third party. So you can kind of outsource, the needing of that kind of, hovering that we want to avoid in the gap year planning and execution experience to someone who can be more of that mentor. And gap year programs offer that ability to kind of allow a parent to step back and let their kid fledge.
Yeah. And it seems like so many families have the dynamic where parents have been very involved in making sure their child has the support that they have needed to thrive, either through an IEP or a 504 plan or support in an independent school system. And the parent has been so involved. And it seems like the gap year also provides an opportunity for parents to back off and for the child and the young person to really develop a sense of independence, and which also allows parents and the student themselves to see where there may be gaps, in their abilities, in their, skills that they need to further develop because they may not know because so much has been done for them, thus far, and they may not realize where those gaps are.
Definitely. And, I think that also if parents have the ability to step away, they'll also be so amazed at what their young adult can accomplish. And I mean, I can't even tell you how many stories I have of young adults doing things that are just wow their parents, they can't believe that their kid traveled through Southeast Asia on their own, on their gap year. But because they scaffolded the year in such a way, they built confidence and they built, the acuity needed to kind of take on that type of challenge. And then everybody comes out more confident as a result. And it's much easier, I think, for parents to make that transition to independent living and college life after a gap year because of that slow process of kind of letting go that can happen on a gap year.
Right. And I just love the little anecdotes that you shared, because I think those success stories of students who benefited from a gap year can be so helpful for parents and students who are considering that process.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that step one for both students and parents is kind of giving permission to think of creative pathways that aren't just what we think about as quote unquote success, right? I think that parents often feel that pressure to kind of say what college their kid is going to, or, what their plans are. And I think that we need to kind of reset that framing and allow people to be excited to talk about all the different pathways that young adults are pursuing.
Right. Is there ever a time when a gap year is not recommended in the work that you've been doing?
It's interesting. I would say there's a couple situations. I would say that for first generation students, students who have very, very strong financial aid packages from colleges that will not defer, there are some financial reasons why you might not decide to take a gap year, because a college can offer, the right money at the right time to make a college education affordable. Or if a college that you've chosen has really good supports in place for students who learn differently, and that seems like the right container and the right amount of support for a young adult at that moment in time. And then I would say beyond that, if a student is just super excited to go to school, super ready to go to school, and knows what they want to do with their education, not as in what they want to do for a career, but knows that they want to show up on day one ready to go, that's a student who can go straight to college and probably thrive. That's not most students. I mean, I would say probably 80% of young adults graduating high school should probably take gap time, in my opinion.
Right. And it's so interesting that you say that, because as I hear and learn more about what a gap year actually is, it just seems like this would be so beneficial to so many students. And I'm wondering what your thoughts on the future of gap years evolving, especially in the context of students who learn and think differently and students in general.
Yes. Well, I think that one of the major roadblocks has been people understanding the range of options and that this is an option, and also accessibility. And, a generation ago, we decided as Americans that we were going to try and make college more accessible by creating Pell Grants and other federal financial aid opportunities and all of these programs that open the doors to different types of higher education for all young adults. And now that system is changing and kind of offering certain advantages to certain people and not for other people. And so we kind of need to remake the system all over again. And I would love to see gap year opportunities more accessible, including therapeutic options. I think that is such we're finding that that's a real issue for a lot of people, is finding the right help at the right time. So I think that the future of gap years is that they're going to continue on the increase, but we need to work as a society to create more opportunities and more accessibility to those options.
Right. And you mentioned therapeutic options. This would be a really great time to kind of talk about what that looks like and who that is for.
Sure. Yeah. So I would think about gap year programs in kind of three categories for this conversation. There's what we would call kind of traditional gap year opportunities. Then there's bridge opportunities or supportive opportunities. And then there's therapeutic programming. So the most supported, obviously, would be therapeutic programming. This would be for a student who has mental health or learning differences challenges that require a lot of support, that require clinical intervention and just that full suite of opportunities. And so there's a lot of programming out there that is typically residential or outpatient that can provide that type of support. Bridge programs are kind of the middle ground area. So this would be programming where there might be clinical staff on hand, but it's not strictly therapeutic. And also critically, the student is there by choice. So that is a real important part of all gap year experiences, I think, but especially for a student who's self-selecting into programming. And then, for traditional gap year programs, those are programs that are generalized. And so students who have, mental health challenges, ADHD, other learning differences, on the spectrum, those are all, you can join a traditional gap year program as long as you're able to meet the criteria for that program in as far as being able to fully participate. So it's not like those are exclusive programs, but if you feel like you need a little bit more support, there are other opportunities as well.
Right. And I mean, again, there's so many opportunities. It feels like there is a choice available for all types of students, from the therapeutic to the traditional, to the self-directed programs. I'm thinking about students who, want to do an internship in an area that interests them. And then the student who does need some more therapeutic and clinical support in the area of personal development, and practical development. And so it's just so wonderful to know that these options are available. And I think it's something that a lot of parents are not aware of. And again, I think there are still a lot of misconceptions about what a gap year is. Everyone is going to go traveling or backpacking in Europe, and that's just not what it is for everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. I sometimes refer to it as the most customizable form of education, because you really get to decide how you learn and grow, and it's going to look a little different for everybody. And the fact is that you don't even have to, I think one of the most important aspects of a gap year is to get out of your bubble. And so for some students, that means fleeing themselves far away from home and exploring different cultures. And for other people, that means pushing their comfort zone to go and do public speaking or to, get their first job. And so I think that that's the main crux of it, is that we're we're allowing young adults to explore the world in ways that allow them to grow properly.
Absolutely. Julie, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your expertise on gap years. I know, like I said, I have learned a lot over the course of this conversation. And so I know our listeners are going to learn a great deal as well. If parents and students want to learn more about making the decision for a gap year, for helping to explore the options available to them, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, I would love that. And the best way would be my website, which is enroutegapyear.com. And for more generalized information, a good landing spot is the Gap Year Association website, which is gapyearassociation.org. And if you are looking for more therapeutic resources, I would highly recommend my colleague, Joanna Liley, and her website is lileyconsulting.com, which is Lilley consulting.com.
Perfect. And I will be sure to put all of those links in the show notes. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have learned a lot. There's a great deal of information in the show notes, so be sure to check it out. And you can get Julia's contact information there as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope that you'll also sign up for our newsletter. There you will get insights, strategies, event updates, and downloads to help your kids and your teens. You'll also get valuable information about how to nurture your child's potential and well-being. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.